Thanks, everybody. I'm David Marsh. Like Ron mentioned, I'm a senior solutions architect at AWS. I'm on our nonprofits team, but I also focus primarily on security. I'm joined by my colleague Michael today, and we are going to talk about security best practices that accelerate impact for your organization. So I'm going to talk a little bit about AWS's approach to security, and I'm going to talk about some best practices that help to simplify processes for your security teams without compromising on security. And then I'm going to pass it over to Michael, who's going to talk about some of our recent security updates and announcements and new features. So with that, let's jump right into it. So first, I want to make sure that we level set on AWS's approach to security. So I'm going to take just a second here to talk sort of high level about how we view security at AWS. So first, security is the top priority, not just for AWS employees and all of the work that we do and how we consider workloads, but also when we're communicating with our customers and the organizations that we work with. So we're always working with security in mind. When we're designing architectures, that's the primary consideration. First and foremost is how do we protect data? How do we protect workloads? How do we protect your users and your employees? The next point that I want to talk about here is that security is everyone's responsibility. We work with our customers to make sure that we're helping them establish a culture of security ownership. And we've heard a little bit about generative AI workloads this morning. That's especially important with generative AI, where teams might be owning their own data sets for knowledge bases and RAG applications, things like that. Having that culture of ownership and understanding that security is everyone's responsibility is critical for these types of workloads. Next, guardrails, not gates. We want to enable users on AWS or even other cloud platforms to think about how they can be unblocked in their work while also staying secure, staying within the concepts of least privilege access. Right? So we try to focus on where we can set up guardrails to keep users on track and have access to the things that they need without setting a lot of gates and hurdles in their way, a lot of obstructions from being able to get their work done. And finally, security is a journey. It's constantly evolving. Threat actors and attacks are constantly evolving, so security processes should as well. We work with our customers to assess where their security posture is now, help them plan for the future. We always view security as a journey. There's no one point in time where you've achieved excellent security, right? It's a continuous process. So I want to talk about some of the common security challenges I see, and full disclosure, these are probably a little bit nonprofit leaning because that's the vertical that I work with the most. But we see these challenges across verticals on AWS with our customers. And the first is our customers have critical data privacy and protection needs. The next is that we often see that technical teams are lean and they're focused on advancing their product, making more impact with their product. And often that makes it difficult to dedicate more time to security processes, right? When you want to make updates, you want to get out that next version, the next release, it's hard to take time to prioritize security. We also see that budgets and resources are prioritized for projects that directly impact the business. There's not always a dedicated security budget. There's not always dedicated security resources, especially at nonprofit organizations. And we see that workloads are unique. There's no one size fits all for security. There's no one-click solution to help you resolve and remediate any security findings in your environment. It takes work, it takes time, and that means that the solutions we recommend are going to be unique, based on various use cases. But with that said, we do have some best practices that I want to talk about today that are designed to help any organization speed up their security processes while keeping them secure and improving security along the way. And the first of those is that automation enables scale. I'm going to talk about some AWS services here, but whether you're working on-prem or with other cloud providers, this is also going to be relevant. Automating your security processes is a big step to being able to handle more work and handle more security processes. So if you are on AWS, you may be familiar with a service called AWS Config for continuous compliance monitoring and configuration management. So Config does two main things here, right? You can monitor the compliance and configuration of your AWS resources. But you can also create rules to check and make sure that those resources stay within those rules that you set. So, for example, maybe you have an AWS S3 bucket with some data, and you set up AWS config to monitor that resource, and you want to make sure that that bucket is never made publicly available. Well, if something happens, say there's a bad actor or maybe an intern or something who isn't really familiar with the environment, gets access and is able to update that bucket and make it publicly available, then AWS config can track that configuration change and can let you know when you have violated that configuration rule for that S3 bucket. So you can use these messages from services like config, these alerts, to automate responses. So in this particular case, one thing you could do is trigger an AWS Lambda function that removes that public access policy or resets the policy to how it was previously configured. So that way, your team doesn't have to, go into the potentially production environment and make changes trying to resolve the issue. You've got an automated process in place to go in and resolve particular issues like that. Similarly, Amazon Guard Duty for threat detection on your AWS resources can generate security findings for you. It works with what I call known threats versus unknown threats. So known threats are these common patterns and types of behavior where we're pretty confident we know what's going on here. Things like Bitcoin mining in maybe regions that you don't use very often. Resources spun up in regions that you don't use very often are sort of red flags that Guard Duty can detect and alert on. There's also anomaly detection, these unknown threats when users have, like was talked about in some of the presentations earlier, when users are performing actions that they don't typically perform, right? Guard Duty can detect and alert on these types of behaviors, and then that's where you can respond. So similarly, if you have an S3 bucket, we'll use the same type of resource, but a different example here, where maybe you do let the public upload or you have users upload to this bucket to process some content, for example. Maybe a malicious file gets uploaded. Guard Duty has an S3 scanning feature for malware detection that can detect potentially malicious files. Now, Guard Duty itself is not going to do anything other than let you know about that file having potentially malicious content, but you can take that alert and you can either delete that file or you can move that file to a quarantine bucket with something like an AWS Lambda function to trigger that process. So the key thread here is that where you can automate these security processes, because it's going to make it a lot easier on your security teams to be able to respond and continue to improve security. One other service I'll talk about here is Security Hub. This service, as the name implies, aggregates findings from a number of AWS and third-party services so that you have a single pane of glass to view the overall security posture of your AWS environment. You can also set up checks with common security frameworks and evaluate your environment with the benchmarks and best practices from those sources as well. Which actually leads really well into our next topic here, centralized logging for faster analysis. So many of our customers on AWS have multiple accounts and multiple workloads. But it's important to take the security logs, have a centralized place to store those logs so that when there's an issue, your security teams know where to go to find the information that they need. So like I mentioned, we have Guard Duty for threat detection. It's going to generate security findings for you to have your security team investigate. You can actually consolidate those into what's called a delegated administrator account, where you have a single AWS account that consolidates those findings for your security team to review holistically. Again, with Security Hub, that helps us get a single pane of glass to look at all of the more comprehensive findings from multiple AWS services so that you can, again, see these all in one place, get a better big picture view of your security posture. And then a newer service we have is Amazon Security Lake. So this is great where you might have a data lake use case for your security logging and analysis. So Security Lake allows you to set up the infrastructure to collect those logs in an open format that can ingest third-party logs as well and give you a single place to aggregate all that data for analysis. And the third best practice I want to talk about here is that AI-driven processes can accelerate remediation of security findings. So some of you may be familiar with Amazon Q Developer. This is a service that can be installed in your IDE and give you things like code snippets and review your code. It does things like static application security testing. It can detect secrets in your code as well, and it can scan your infrastructure as code for any potential misconfigurations. So there are lots of things you can do here to speed up the security processes on your code and your application development. You can shift left so that you're finding these vulnerabilities earlier in the software development lifecycle, which is ultimately going to save your team time, and it's going to save your team money because you're not going to have to deploy or at least push forward in that development lifecycle to testing to find these security vulnerabilities. You can find them before any commits are made and code is pushed through that lifecycle. So with that said, I'm going to pass it to Michael, who's going to tell us a little bit more about some of our new security tools and features.
Cool, David. Thank you. So while my colleague David just kind of went through some of the challenges that our customers have brought to us in terms of security and some of the best practices that we have, I'm going to touch a little bit more. He kind of went over some of the tools that we offer, but I'm going to talk about some of the additions and updates that we've made to those tools to kind of help you out, right? So before today, by a show of hands, get a little bit interactive here. How many were familiar with some of those tools that were already introduced that are made available through AWS? Cool. Quite a few number of you, so that makes my job a little bit easier. So in terms of the latest security tools, I'm going to be talking about that in concert with a couple of categories. How when using artificial intelligence to help aid in the detection and responding to it. David kind of alluded to that already, so I'm going to show you how it's actually put into practice. And how to actually do automated active monitoring, right? It helps your team save a lot of time and what the tools are available there. And obviously kind of touching on being able to consolidate that data, looking at your data sources from a heterogeneous perspective, being able to have a lot of information so that you have your teams being able to make better informed decisions. And a lot of these tools, as you're going to find, is more targeted towards that security professional, right? Making their jobs a little bit easier, making their jobs a little bit more effective, and automate where you can so that they can focus on the higher priority challenges. And then obviously we couldn't have this presentation without talking about generative AI and how it can be looked at and how security can be looked at from a generative AI perspective. All right, David already kind of alluded to this, Amazon Guard Duty. It's our fully managed service that kind of helps you on the detection side of it. Now with extended threat detection, we added this capability kind of going back into, with security incidents. Certain activities in it in itself sometimes aren't security issues, right? But when you look at it from the perspective of what type of incidents are occurring and when it's occurring, for example, if you have a bad actor perhaps trying to gain access to your system, it may start off with a couple failed attempts. Could be somebody just forgetting their password. But then if you look at a sequence of events over time, it may be indicative of a malicious activity or a malicious attack where they're gaining access to your system. They're creating a new user. They're using that new user to actually export data out of your systems. You want to be able to correlate those events and being able to identify that to your security professionals so that they can actually take action upon that, right? It's going to be mapped to like these MITRE attacks or whatnot so that then recommendations can be made on how to remediate or take future actions to prevent those type of incidents from occurring, right? And that's what we offer with extended threat detection. So from detecting to actually taking action. So this kind of goes back to what David kind of alluded to, where being able to automate certain activities is going to help you scale, right? Because you don't want to be having your ability to grow your company and grow your business being being constrained by the number of security professionals that you have in your company, right? You don't want them to be a blocker, you want them to be an aid. So using security incident response, for example, in that last example that I provided, if there is an incident that's actually occurring, you can actually automate some of those activities already, right? Start quarantining those activities. Perhaps it's an S3 bucket that they've started exporting data. Change the security policies that's related to that so that that activity stops, or block that user from gaining access to other systems and whatnot. It's using AI/ML to actually look at those patterns and being able to take those actions. And then what this allows your security professionals to do is actually go in and investigate what is the cause of that action. Did that where did that user, that bad actor gain that user information from, right? Was it somebody that just happened to write their password on some place where a person who shouldn't have access to it actually be able to gain access? All right. And then being able to consolidate all your data, right? So what we just offered is a zero ETL integration between Amazon OpenSearch and Amazon Security Lake. As David alluded to, the Amazon Security Lake is where you're going to be able to gain or be able to put all your security-related data into one location, right? With the zero ETL integration with OpenSearch, it's going to give your security teams the ability to now interrogate that data across a wide variety of sources so that you get a better and fuller picture, being able to investigate incidents a lot more fresh, being able to know where perhaps a security incident started from an external resource, right? Because all that data is coming in not just from AWS sources, but you can integrate it with third-party sources, whether it's another cloud or third-party services that SaaS providers that you may be integrating with, or even your own on-premise systems, right? So again, this is being able to consolidate all that data, being able to use some of the capabilities in OpenSearch, being able to do full text searches against that data to either look at visualizations that's already a part of OpenSearch, or being able to just correlate a lot more of that data. Again, aiding your security professionals in speeding up their security investigation times. All right. We already kind of touched on Bedrock. Jeff kind of touched on it earlier already. So normally we have a demo at this point, but since just for time's sake, this is a take-home or do-at-home demo. But basically, what are the capabilities that we're kind of highlighting here is using this concept of Bedrock agents. And what Bedrock is, just to put a little bit more flavor around it, is it's our fully managed service that's going to give your developers access to a wide variety of different foundational models from like the different popular providers like Cohere, AI-21 Labs, Llama, or Meta, and so forth, to be able to use those foundational models now to sit on top of your security data, where, again, instead of having to write out language, you can use natural language to interrogate the data. For example, you can ask the system, what was user Mike P doing on February 14th? And if it was smart, it would show nothing because Mike was out with his wife having dinner on Valentine's Day. So again, the QR code's there. For those at home and here, please feel free. The sample code is hosted on GitHub. All right. Taking one step further, and again, kind of double clicking on what David have already mentioned in terms of Amazon Bedrock, we have this feature of guardrails, right? And what guardrails is kind of setting the boundaries for what your generative AI models that you're giving access either to your developers or to your customers on what it can actually do, right? You want it to stay within the domains of what it's supposed to be doing. You don't want it to kind of delve into any areas that are not good for the brand of your company's brand, whether it be diving into politics or religion or something like that, right? You want to be able to set those guardrails. And what we did with automated reasoning checks was we brought this feature where a concern of a lot of our customers was this notion of hallucinations, where the model itself is just making up answers, right? Where, previous years or when customers were just experimenting with Gen AI, where the model getting the answers 90% of the time was okay, right? But what we found was that a lot of customers were hesitant to move into production because they wanted to protect their brand. They didn't want the model itself to just make up answers. So the way we did it was use this AI/ML, or artificial intelligence and machine learning language model. We provided a corpus of like reasoning of how to arrive at a particular answer. So that whenever the model provides an answer, that it's mathematically proven to be 100% correct. So the responses that your solutions using generative AI and the models that are on Bedrock that it's providing are 100% accurate. Okay, the next capability within guardrails that I want to talk about is this multimodal toxicity detection. So before, a lot of the Gen AI models were, we had guardrails applied to textual interactions, whether it's language or being able to type text, ask it questions and stuff like that. Some of the interactions you've probably been familiar with. But as we see an adoption of generative AI models in other industries where it's interacting with images, video, and so forth, we wanted to give the customers the ability to be able to apply the same guardrails and in the same UI, in fact, to prevent, again, the model from generating content that is something that your company doesn't want to support or want to be able to protect your brand, right? Whether it's touching on hate, violence, or any type of negative speech. And of course, those thresholds are adjustable by your enterprises because, depending on what industry the customer is coming from, you probably have different thresholds, right? So if you're in the entertainment business, perhaps your threshold is a little bit lower than if you're in a professional service industry like financial services, insurance, and so forth, right? You want to be a little bit more cognitive of what type of results your models are able to produce. And again, this is something that's available for you to try out today. And with these capabilities, I'm going to hand it back to David to kind of help us wrap up here.
Yeah. So just a few key takeaways here. Strong security processes can accelerate impact for your organization, but there has been historically this perceived trade-off, right? Strong security might actually slow down the innovation that your organization is trying to make, right? We want to focus on security processes here that can actually accelerate. And so to do that, look towards automation to help enable scale. That's what's going to help you scale up is having good processes for automation in place so that you can rely on those automated remediations or things like AWS Lambda functions, taking care of some of the more common, easy to remediate processes, freeing your security teams up to focus on the big picture things and handle the critical issues. Next, centralized logging allows for faster incident response. So having a single place to go, a single source of truth for your security data is going to help your teams more quickly respond during those critical incidents. And then leveraging AI to identify vulnerabilities sooner with things like Amazon Q Developer in the development process. That's kind of using AI for security, but then also looking towards the things Michael was talking about around Amazon Bedrock and implementing security in your Gen AI applications. These are all things that are really critical in the security landscape right now. So with that, I want to just say thank you for taking the time to listen to us today. We really appreciate it. You can connect with us on socials like LinkedIn if you'd like. Again, thanks for the time. We appreciate it.